Welcome, everyone, to the Apoco-Larry podcast. I'm Steve.
Lawrence Van Beek.
You know what? We're in the same room. So it's really cool to do like the live version together.
This is wonderful. Steve came up last night, and we hung out for a little while. Now we're going to do a little bit more tonight. So these have been glory days.
Yes.
Well, you're here for computer stuff up at the King's University.
Yes. Yeah. And this podcast is the only thing that is keeping us from eating right now. So we're right on task.
it may be a quick one.
Yeah. So, my friend, we're going to talk about Nehemiah 8 this week, right?
We are. And I don't think I'll give you any lead up, since neither of us have even read it this week.
Oh, we've done extensive preparation.
Our whole lives. Our whole lives
have been preparing for this moment in time.
And you know, this one is about Richard Nixon.
How so?
Well, it's the Watergate. All the people came together in the square before the Watergate.
Okay, hence how it was named. Now, I've learned a little U.S. history inside the biblical text.
There you are. And I don't know why Watergate was it the hotel was in a place called Watergate?
I think so.
Or something.
I think so. For those enterprising listeners that want to look that up, we actually don't really care.
We know that he was impeached.
Yeah.
You know, and we don't know why they use fruit in this. But anyway, so go ahead and read, Steve. Read a couple of verses.
No worries. Here we go, folks.
We'll push on.
Nehemiah 8, starting at verse 1. All the people came together as one in the square before the Watergate. They told Ezra, the teacher of the law, to bring out the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had commanded for Israel. So on that first day of the 7th month, Ezra, the priest, brought the law before the assembly, which was made up of men and women and all who were able to understand. He read it aloud from daybreak till noon, as he faced the square before the Watergate, in the presence of the men, women, and others who could understand. I'll get to why I think that's funny later. And all the people listened attentively to the book of the law. Ezra, the teacher of the law, stood high on a wooden platform built for the occasion. Beside him stood
a whole bunch of guys.
A whole bunch of guys that I'm not even going to try. And on his left were a whole bunch of guys that I'm not even going to try. But Zechariah was in there, so I could say that one.
Yes.
Ezra opened the book. All the people could see him because he was standing above them. As he opened it, the people stood up, which is actually fun, right? We do that in some churches today.
Normally, that's not uncommon.
Yeah. Ezra praised the Lord, the great God, and all the people lifted their hands and responded, Amen, Amen. Then they bowed down and worshipped the Lord with their faces to the ground.
And this was the place, Steve, where I realized that I had been mistaken for many, many years. Remember I said that Ezra found a book of the law. There hadn't been one, and he found it, and he started reading from it. But there's no evidence of that at all. and some thought that actually someone earlier than Ezra found a book of the law, and there was no evidence for that either.
Okay.
So it appears that the book of the law has always been around.
Oh.
So the book of law, of course, is your Pentateuch, the Torah,
right?
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and he was an expert in that, and that's what he was bringing forth to the people at that time. So Nehemiah has rebuilt the city.
Yeah.
Ezra, quite a bit before it. There's quite a bit of argument over how the dates work in Ezra and Nehemiah, right? But it seems like quite a bit before Ezra had rebuilt the temple, and now Nehemiah has rebuilt the walls, and now they've come back in, and Ezra is bringing all the people back to God, and they must have come back to God already because the temple's been finished, so they've already been doing other stuff.
Okay.
Do you remember the temple was finished, and there was crying and there was rejoicing, and from a distance you couldn't tell. All that you could hear was a ruckus noise.
Yeah.
And but the older people who remembered the first temple were quite upset at how poor the second temple was.
Right.
But the important thing for us, this is now what they refer to officially as the Second Temple period.
Oh,
right?
Okay. Yeah.
And you're actually just on the cusp of what the Christians called the 400 silent years. Because there was a period of about 400 years before the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi, probably. And in the Jewish book, the last book is actually, I think, Chronicles. But in the Christian Bible, it's Malachi, and the first book of the New Testament, and the coming of Jesus.
Yeah.
That's the 400 silent years. Second Temple period is this time of Ezra up until the destruction of Herod's temple, which would have been AD 70.
Okay.
So that's the Second Temple period.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, so Ezra is up there and he's pronouncing the word of God to the people.
Yeah. In front of all who could understand.
And yes,
like when it was Mr. Ed there or something like that.
yeah. What are you doing here? You do not understand. Get out of here.
You and your talking horse out
Yeah.
No, that's fine. I'm sorry to make light of that. But anyway, no, it's just kind of fun.
No, I think it's really good. And interestingly, because people were actually fairly literate, which is odd, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you have this impression that 20th century people are the only literate people.
Yeah, they were all dumb, right? Because they were prehistoric. We think of them as prehistoric people.
Yeah, or early historic people at least. And but they weren't. They weren't dumb.
Yeah.
And they also, in this period of time, well, I don't know about right here, but 400 years from there, people lived into their 80s. Some of the Roman rulers were octogenarians, and John was an octogenarian.
Right, yeah.
And so this whole idea that everybody dies in their, the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, people lived till they were 35, right? And died.
Yeah.
But at this period in time, they were actually eating well and living quite long lives.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, are they doing sort of is this a process of consecration? Is that kind of what we're seeing here from a side?
Yes, they are. This is another step in consecrating the land and the temple and the people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Very good point.
Awesome. All right, folks, we'll pick it up at verse 7, and yes, I'm going to skip a bunch of names again, so just be prepared. The Levites instructed the people in the law.
But you have to have Bani.
Bani's in there, yeah. And
there's like U2 is there with Bani and
Jacob or Jacob or I don't know.
Peliah and
lots of fun names.
Azariah.
The Levites, with a whole bunch of names, instructed the people in the law while the people were standing there. Instructed the people in the law while the people were standing there. They read from the book of the law of God, making it clear and giving the meaning so that the people understood what was being read.
Very much like we do when we're teaching.
Yeah.
Very much like we do in this podcast.
Yeah, and it's not...
I am Ezra!
Well, that's... Sorry. It's not saying that the people were stupid, but we still instruct people today in the book. Mm-hmm. We think it's at a higher level, but we don't understand this stuff when we read it. So, yeah, of course, yeah. Awesome. Verse 9 now. Then Nehemiah the governor, Ezra the priest and the teacher of the law, and the Levites who were instructing the people, said to them all, "This day is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn or weep." And that goes back to Larry's other observation. All the people had been weeping as they listened to the words of the law. Nehemiah said, "Go and enjoy choice food and sweet drinks, and send some to those who have nothing prepared. This day is holy to our God. Do not grieve. The joy of the Lord is your strength." The Levites calmed all the people, saying, "Be still, for this is a holy day. Do not grieve." Then all the people went away to eat and drink, to send portions of food, and to celebrate with great joy, because they now understood the words that had been given, now understood the words that had been made known to them. On the second day of the month, the heads of all the families, along with the priests and the Levites, gathered around Ezra the teacher to give attention to the words of the law. They found written in the law, which the Lord had commanded through Moses, that the Israelites were to live in temporary shelters during the festival of the 7th month.
Yeah. So, by the way, I should mention that this festival is Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year.
Yeah.
Which was which is the first of the month of Tishrei, and that's why it's such an important month. It's Jewish New Year.
Oh, okay. Yeah, awesome. And that they should go and proclaim this word and spread it throughout their towns and in Jerusalem. Go out into the hill country and bring back branches from the olive and wild olive trees, and from the myrtles, the palms, and the shade trees, to make temporary shelters, as it is written.
I don't understand the wild olives. Like there were olives and there were just real party hardy olives.
Yeah, just woo! Wearing the bandanas.
So they obviously had olives that they grew in gardens and stuff that they probably manipulated.
Yeah.
And then they'd have these olives that just grew off in the hillside. Because Paul also uses the wild olive as an illustration of Jews and Gentiles coming together.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, the wild olive.
Grafting in the wild olive.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
And so I don't know enough about agriculture to know maybe that makes the whole thing stronger and more healthy. I know wild salmon is considered better than tame salmon.
Yeah.
And yet wild cows are not considered as tasty as tame cows. So.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
not a big deal, but and just the note that they ate choice food and sweet drinks. So this is a big celebration. This is not Passover where you're eating crackers and unleavened bread and things like that and eating fast, but you're actually just full out partying.
It's a full celebration.
It's a full celebration and a glorious time.
Yeah.
And the crying again was people grieving over the words of God, I guess.
Yeah.
And their lack of maybe I wonder if it's their lack of obedience. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure. But anyway, this is a big important party time. Which verse are you on?
I'm on 16.
16. Okay.
It is kind of fun to think too that God wanted them to be happy.
Yeah.
I think we tend to look at God, he wants us to be sad and repentant all the time, rather than there is some joy in what we do in terms of service.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And the Jewish people have many really fun holy days.
Yeah. Okay, well, how did we make Fiddler on the Roof anyway, 16. So the people went out and brought back branches and built for themselves temporary shelters on their own roofs. These are the first tents and RVs that we have. In their courtyards, in the courts of the house of God, and in the square by the water gate, and the one by the gate of Ephraim. The whole company that had gone out from exile built temporary shelters and lived in them. From the days of Joshua, son of Nun, until that day, the Israelites had not celebrated it like this, and their joy was very great. Day after day, from the first day to the last, Ezra read from the book of the law of God. They celebrated the festival for 7 days, and on the 8th day, in accordance with the regulation, there was an assembly.
Yeah. They do a lot of this 7-day celebration stuff. I think their weddings were a week long as well, right? So, these guys really knew how to lay back and enjoy themselves and enjoy each other. But I like that they say he seems to say that, from the time of Joshua, that's the time that they entered the land. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of well, what is it now? 450, and they entered the land. David was 1,000, so they entered the land at about 1,200 or 1,300.
Wow.
1,200 or 1,100.
Just missed a few. Just a tiny bit.
Yeah. So 800 years.
It's like the year of Jubilee. Like, how many times do they celebrate that?
Yeah, and it's intriguing too that they knew as much as they did about stuff that happened hundreds and hundreds of years before. We don't.
Yeah.
Like, we don't know stuff. Like, we might know bits and pieces back to the 1700s, but not much. No.
Right.
We knew they had a lot of cod. But it is kind of neat, and it's a whole 7-day celebration, and maybe that's where we stop tonight, and we just say that Israel's going to confess their sins in the next chapter, and we can talk about that, but just how important the time of Ezra was to the people of Israel.
Yeah.
Because after the time of Ezra, what we call the 400 silent years, there were no scriptures that ended up in our Bible.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff was written.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff was happening.
Yeah. It wasn't that the whole community just went static. God stopped talking, and God was still talking to them.
And they're doing this in the midst of the Persian wars in Greece. Like, Persia was busy.
Yeah.
They were busy with killing the Greeks.
Yeah.
Like, this is around the time of the Spartans, of the 300, remember? And all that kind of, like, the 300 is a real story.
Right.
It may be a fake story, but I think it's a real story.
Yeah.
Thermopylae was a real place, and the Greeks did fight off the Persians at Thermopylae. And Leonidas did die there. And the king of Persia actually beheaded him, which was not something Persians were supposed to do. And they buried everybody, which is another thing, like, because they were Zoroastrian. So there was all this stuff going on, but God was doing His thing there.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
kind of neat.
Yeah, it is. My friend, thanks for that. That was fantastic. It's a fantastic thing to see. Here's Nehemiah consecrating the nation and kind of saying, hey, we're going to do this celebration that you haven't done for 800 years.
Yeah. Or not to this level. Anyway.
Not to this level. And celebrate, dang it. Stop thinking about how you failed God. Look forward to how you're going to serve Him now. And, follow this law.
Well, even in the midst of this, you got Sanballat and those guys trying to make this thing stop. I still struggle with that guy who says that they did things wrong in Nehemiah.
Right.
They write it as if what they did was the right thing.
Yeah. Awesome, folks. So good to be back with you again. I know we took 2 weeks off, and part of that was me, and part of that was Larry was traveling too. So good to be among you. But until the next time we get to do this, I was Steve, he was Larry, and this was the Apoco-Larry podcast.